He was still breathing, sitting upright, eyes half open, frozen in place. Over 40 climbers passed him that day. Some thought he was already dead. Others knew that he wasn't. None stayed long enough to save him. This is the story of David Sharp, an experienced mountaineer who died in one of the most bizarre and heartbreaking ways on Mount Everest. Not from a fall, not from an avalanche, but from something far colder. Silence, isolation, and the choice others made to walk past him. What happened on that mountain shocked the climbing world and exposed the brutal truth of Everest's death zone. David Sharp wasn't an inexperienced climber. Born in England, he had a passion for mountaineering and had already attempted Everest before. But in 2006, he made a fateful decision, climbing alone. Mount Everest has long been a symbol of ultimate achievement for climbers, but it's also a place where ambition meets tragedy. The year 2006 was one of the deadliest in Everest's history, with overcrowded routes, extreme weather, and multiple fatalities. That season, David Sharp was among the climbers attempting to reach the summit. Unlike most, he chose to climb without a Sherpa team or proper support, a decision that would prove to be fatal. The north route, which Sharp took, is a notoriously more difficult one than the south. It's colder, windier, and has fewer resources for climbers in distress. Sharp had previously attempted Everest in 2003, but had to turn back. This time, he was determined to succeed. He was part of an expedition organized by Asian Trekking, but climbed independently without backup oxygen or a radio to communicate in case of emergency. The ascent was brutal. Sharp moved at a slow pace, struggling as he climbed higher. By the time he'd reached around 8,000 meters, his body was already weakening. Right around this point, the air's too thin to sustain human life for long, and every moment becomes a gamble between pressing forward and turning back. This is because the oxygen levels are dangerously low, and prolonged exposure leads to confusion, exhaustion, and ultimately death, hence giving it the name, the death zone. In the spring of 2006, Everest was particularly unforgiving. The season saw an influx of climbers, creating traffic jams on the mountain. Some reached the top, while others never made it back. David Sharp's decision to attempt the summit alone was already a risk, but the conditions that year made survival even less likely. Unlike the south route, where organized expeditions have more rescue resources, the north route is far less forgiving. Fewer climbers, harsher winds, and little to no chance of help if something went wrong. So, climbing solo, Sharp lacked immediate assistance. Without Sherpas to check on him or fellow climbers to rely on, he was completely alone in one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Soon after the ascent, the temperatures plunged well below freezing, and his body struggled against the thin air. Though he managed to reach high on the mountain, his slow pace and lack of oxygen left him critically weakened. With no one to intervene, he was on the verge of becoming another tragic statistic of Everest. As night fell over Everest, Sharp found himself in one of the worst possible situations imaginable. Alone, exposed to severe cold, and unable to move. Now, just a little above 8,500 meters, he'd taken shelter inside a small rocky alcove that happens to be a spot infamous among climbers. It was the same place where another fallen mountaineer, known as Green Boots, had rested before his death years earlier. And now Sharp found himself in the same exact position, freezing, barely conscious, and running out of time faster than he realized. It's important to note that at that altitude, even the strongest climbers struggle. Coupled with the extremely changing environment, and you had a recipe for disaster. The body's unable to function properly, and without supplemental oxygen, even carrying your own weight becomes nearly impossible, let alone carrying around equipment as well. Weak and disoriented, Sharp could no longer help himself. His legs were likely frostbitten, his breathing shallow. Hours passed, and the mountain remained silent around him. By early morning, the first climbers of the day began making their way up. Some saw him sitting motionless inside the cave. At first glance, he appeared lifeless, just another frozen body on Everest. But when a few other climbers paused for a closer look, they realized he was still alive. He was barely conscious, unable to speak clearly. The few climbers that had stopped to assess David Sharp's condition say that by the time they reached him, his body was hunched inside the cave, with his limbs stiff from the cold. His breathing was shallow, his eyes barely open. When asked if he was okay, he could only mumble a few words, too far gone to respond properly, and obviously too weak to call for help. At this altitude, rescuing a stranded climber is nearly impossible. Every movement takes enormous effort, and even the fittest climbers struggle to carry their own weight. So from there on, some tried to give him oxygen in hopes that it would revive him, while others debated whether anything could be done. But it was clear that with the freezing temperatures and lack of mobility, the chances of bringing him down safely were slim. More than 40 climbers passed him that day, each making their own decision. Some assumed he was already beyond saving. Others believed he was already too far gone, continued toward the summit. The harsh reality of Everest is that most climbers prioritize their own survival. Hours passed, and Sharp remained in the same spot, slipping further into unconsciousness. By the time the last groups descended, his fate was sealed. Everest had claimed another life, and the controversy had only just begun. David Sharp's death sparked outrage across the mountaineering world. The fact that more than 40 climbers had passed him, some stopping briefly, others not at all, raised serious ethical questions as to whether more could have been done, or if he really was beyond saving by the time anybody found him. Sir Edmund Hillary, one of the first men to summit Everest, was among the harshest of critics. He condemned the climbers who walked past Sharp, calling it inhumane. In his view, no summit was worth leaving a man to die. Many agreed, but then there were others arguing that Everest has its own brutal games and rules at play, and that given the circumstances, carrying an incapacitated climber down is nearly impossible. Some said those who stopped did all they could, but without a full rescue team, survival was unlikely. Asian Trekking, the expedition company Sharp had joined, also came under scrutiny. Though he climbed alone, questions were raised about why he wasn't monitored more closely. His family, devastated by the loss, defended him, saying he was experienced and knew the risks. Despite the debates, one thing was clear: his death had exposed the harsh realities of Everest. It also paved the way for yet another haunting question: how many more deaths would follow? David Sharp's story became one of Everest's most haunting tragedies. His final moments, spent alone in the death zone, served as a grim reminder of how unforgiving the mountain can be. Unlike other climbers who perished in storms or accidents, Sharp's fate was different. He was seen and within reach, yet still lost. It's his case that changed the way people viewed Everest. More discussions emerged about ethics, preparation, and the risks of climbing without proper support. Some teams began prioritizing rescue efforts, but the reality remained. At such extreme altitudes, survival often depends on personal decisions rather than outside help. Years later, Sharp's name is still linked to Everest's darkest dilemma. It's not like his tragic death stopped climbers from chasing their dreams, but it did leave an unsettling question behind. If you found yourself in the death zone, weak and fading, would somebody stop to help, or would they simply walk past?